G'day guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to attempt to challenge you to revise your thinking and reconsider some fundamental assumptions. Assumptions that are so deeply embedded in our consciousness that we don't even know that they're there. So the assumption I'm going to use as an example today is Chernobyl and the events surrounding it. But first, let's assume that we all have the same views on the environment and environmental movement. What we do know, or at least should know, is that Chernobyl was one of the greatest environmental disasters ever, right? The largest man-made disaster in human history. Though with our modern eyes, it may stun you when you discover, although Chernobyl was a tragic event, it's not remotely close to the global catastrophe we imagined. Roughly 50 people died in Chernobyl, around the same amount of Americans that die daily in traffic accidents. So this was a global disaster when only 50 people died. Regardless, what we find is how resilient our Earth's defense system is. But with no lack of trying, we've all been convinced, perhaps, that these so-called disasters, although a tragedy in some cases, are perhaps falsely recorded and more of a way of keeping us all in a state of fear. So what we have been led to believe about Chernobyl was not merely wrong, it was astonishingly wrong. Now, let's use this graph to emphasize my point, and I do apologize of its early appearance. It's pretty old, from around 2005. And what it depicts is the estimates of death surrounding Chernobyl from the major sources of news and information of the time. Apologies about its cutoff here. This is 40,000, this number that's cut off, and starting at 1,000. So let's take a quick look at it. And the New York Post, the very next year, estimating around 35,000. So dramatic difference. The New York Times chilling out at 1987 to around 1,000. And remember, this is just estimated deaths, not recorded. So the trend goes on, and as you can see, it lowers in the late 90s, and in 2000 the BBC estimated again around 30,000. Now, keeping in mind only 56 people died, now to report that 15 to 30,000 people are going to die when the actual number was 56 represents a very large error. And it seems difficult to make a mistake of that scale. Of course, you're probably thinking, we're dealing with radiation, what about long-term consequences? Unfortunately for the media, their reports are less accurate here. As you can see, the future Chernobyl-related illness and deaths. In '96, they predicted around 3.5 million people will die of radiation effects from after this event. It does go down and fluctuates again in 2001, eventually residing in 2005 by the UN Commission at 4,000. Interestingly, according to the UN report, the largest public health problem created by the Chernobyl event was damaging psychological impact due to a lack of information. So this manifested itself as negative self-assessments of health, a belief in shortened life expectancy, a lack of initiative and dependence on assistance from the state. In other words, the greatest damage on the people of Chernobyl was caused by bad information. These people weren't blighted by radiation so much as by terrifying and false information. We should ponder this just for a minute to understand what it implies. We demand strict controls on radiation because it's such a health hazard. But clearly, Chernobyl suggests that false information can be just as damaging to our health as radiation. Now, I'm not saying radiation is not a threat. I'm also not saying Chernobyl is not a genuinely serious event. But thousands of Ukrainians who didn't die were made invalids out of fear. They were told to be afraid. They were told they were going to die when they weren't. They were told their children would be deformed when they weren't. They were told they couldn't have children when they could. They were authoritatively promised a future of cancer, deformities, pain, and decay. It's no wonder they responded as they did. We need to recognize that this type of human response is very well documented. Authoritatively telling people they are going to die can in itself be fatal. This is not a new phenomenon. Australian Aborigines, for example, have a similar tradition called the pointing of the bone. A shaman shakes a bone at a person, sings a song, and soon after the person dies. In modern day we call this hex death. A person is cursed by an authority figure and subsequently dies. According to medical studies, the person generally dies of dehydration, implying that they just gave up. But the progression is erratic, and shock systems may play a part, suggesting adrenal effects of fright and hopelessness. Yet this deadly curse was initiated with information and can be undone with information. So today I use Chernobyl as an example to make my point, but the predictions made regarding Chernobyl are not alone when it comes to false news, creating terror by information. The population boom prompted a theory that by the 1960s, 60 million Americans will starve to death from a lack of food that didn't happen. Other scientists warned of mass species extinction by the year 2000, predicting that all animal species will halve. That didn't happen. The Club of Rome told us that we would run out of raw materials ranging from oil to copper by the 1990s, and that didn't happen either. Regardless that none of these came true, it didn't stop millions of people fearing these facts becoming reality. Meaning for the majority of people's lives exposed to these teachings, they were worried about the decay of the environment, the tragic loss of animal species, and the collapse of ecosystems. On top of that, we're poisoned by pesticides, sprayed by chemtrails, falling sperm count from endocrine disruptors, cancer from power lines, cancer from red meat, cancer from cell phones, cancer from computer screens, cancer from food coloring, hairspray, electric razors, electric blankets, coffee, chlorinated water, fluoridated water. It never seems to end. So, what I'm trying to spark is for people to take a new path. Considering lockdown is lifting, there is a whole new type of enemy out there to deal with. And I don't mean CV. I'm talking about misinformation. We need to ask ourselves, is anything the idiot box news channels tell us worth listening to? When studying events in the past and investigating the effects these events had on people, we discover that the predictions made are usually exaggerated and only live on in the fearful minds as a result. In 30 years' time, people will read a newspaper from today and have no idea who people like Donald Trump, Scott Morrison, or Boris Johnson are. They will be forgotten, as they should be. They won't matter in 6 months, and they certainly won't matter in 6 years. And if they won't matter then, are they really worth our attention now? As David Brinkley once said, the one function TV news performs very well is that when there is no news, we give it to you with the same emphasis as if there were.